All right, good morning, everyone, afternoon and evening. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're sheltering in place, and that's what we're doing today. Let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend, Swami Cree Ananda, we open our hearts and minds to your transforming presence. We are your children. Guide us as the loving mother that you are, and help us to understand that wherever you take us is just where we want to be. For if you are with us, all is well. Om. Peace. Amen. Well, I received a few questions which all have to do with the difference between being detached, being even-minded, being surrendered to God's will, and simply being apathetic. And I think that this is a very good question and a very good nuance. All the ideas begin to overlap, but it doesn't hurt to hear these over and over again. So I'm going to also go to Affirmations for Self-Healing, Swamiji's wonderful book. And I'm going to talk about enthusiasm, because enthusiasm is closely related to all of this. Swamiji gives us a couple of wonderful paragraphs, beautifully summarizing the quality, an affirmation, and a prayer. Enthusiasm is the spirit of joy channeled through the power of the will. I'm going to say that again. Enthusiasm is the spirit of joy channeled through the power of the will. If we want to know joy, we must live always in the full expectation of it. Not even earthly happiness can come to those who demand it glumly, or who work for it with their eyes to the ground. To achieve happiness, one must work with happiness. To achieve divine joy, one must be keenly enthusiastic in everything one does. Never presume, never brush aside that subtle feeling of doubt which attends false emotional enthusiasm. Try always to let God's joy express itself through you. Thus your enthusiasm will grow eventually to become His joy. Swami's affirmation: in everything I do, my enthusiasm soars to embrace infinity. In everything I do, my enthusiasm soars to embrace infinity. And then we pray, O perfect bliss, guide me that I express Thee through my every feeling. May my enthusiasm be a channel for Thy joy. You know, Swami himself, at the end of his life, he wrote a letter which became known as the Easter letter, because he died about a week or 10 days after Easter, and this letter came out just around Easter time, April 2013, to orient us. And it was a real goodbye letter, and we could all feel it. People did not like that letter as a collective. We were not fond of that letter. But he said, he was talking about this extreme feeling of disinclination for the world. Disinclination for the things of the world, the Sanskrit word for it is Vairagya. And so there was a tremendous feeling of Vairagya in that letter, the letter that he wrote. And he said, enthusiasm has always been the hallmark of my nature, he said, and I feel no enthusiasm for anything now. Of course, he was really getting ready to leave. But just commenting that enthusiasm had always been the hallmark of his nature was actually a very instructive comment for me, because that is, when I would think back over all the years that I was with Swamiji, I would always say, have always said, that I didn't really care what we were doing. If we were just going into Nevada City to go pick up dry cleaning, it was more enjoyable to go pick up dry cleaning with Swamiji than it was really basically to do about anything else I could think of. And when he used the word enthusiasm, I realized that's what it was. The Swami was always enthusiastic. And he was always channeling God's joy through the power of his will. That's what enthusiasm is. Enthusiasm is not, I love this, I want this is the most important thing in the world, I'm going to get this, it's going to make me happy. Enthusiasm is not about things. Enthusiasm is the way that you approach life. And you approach life with your heart wide open and a complete willingness to, in the moment, realize that if God has brought me to this moment, why would I want anything else? And why would I hold back from this? And this sort of like, we have a lot of reasons for holding back, but none of them are valid unless it's what he's warning us there. Don't become enthusiastic in a way that makes you off-center. Enthusiasm that makes you off-center is you're being compelled. You're being compelled by your desires and your fears. Enthusiasm that is channeling divine joy through willpower is a completely different kind of energy. And that's what it is that we're trying to live with. And one of the things about the masters, one of the things about the saints and the masters that make it hard for ordinary people to live with them is that they're always fully present with full energy. You know, I had an interesting experience. It was actually one of the very first, it was the very first time I would say that God spoke to me, and it was quite humorous. I was probably 19. I think I was 19. I had just begun to learn the teachings of self-realization. And I was really very much of a novice and mostly just thought. It was mostly ideas to me. And I have an enthusiastic temperament by nature, but my enthusiasm has always been, used to be, distorted by impatience. And so my enthusiasm would be I would be enthusiastic about this, but immediately my mind would start thinking about what was going to come next. And so I was never completely in the present because I was always thinking about the future. And I remember I was washing dishes in this little house I was living in at that time. And while I was washing the dishes, I was thinking about finishing the dishes, so as soon as they were finished, I could go do whatever it was that I had to do next. None of it, relatively speaking, had any real importance, and nothing was more important than anything else. Nothing was even more or less pleasant than anything else. It was just, instead of channeling through willpower the joy of the moment in washing these dishes, much of my mind was somewhere else, thinking that things, I don't know what I was thinking. But the voice of God spoke to me, the first time I feel the voice of God ever spoke to me, in a slightly New York accent. There's no logic to it being a New York accent. Nobody in my life had that accent, but it had the right tone for what I was trying to say. And I literally heard a voice inside my head say, "What's your hurry, honey? It's just one damn thing after another." Can you imagine? It was perfect. It was an absolute perfect instruction. What is your hurry? It's just one damn thing after another. You know, and I've contemplated that so many times in like more than 50 years, you know, since it came to me like that. Because that is what happens. We just think that instead of giving ourselves to what's in front of us, we'll give ourselves to something else later. But what happens is we're always divided. And so we never have the full energy into anything. Swami Cree Ananda was just the opposite. The very popular phrase, multitasking, he just thought that was the most terrible idea that you could have. He was extraordinarily prolific creatively. He wrote hundreds of pieces of music, something over 400, 150 books, founded communities, counseled thousands of people, kept up a huge correspondence, traveled all over the world, gave countless hours of lectures and filmed programs that are now on the internet. I mean, it just goes on and on. What is the secret of your enormous productivity? He said, I concentrate fully on whatever I'm doing, and I do one thing at a time. Because if you do one thing at a time and put 100% of your energy into it, then, as Swami said, what would take someone else a week, he said, it would take me an hour. Because I just concentrate and I know what to do. But when we divide our energy, we never have the benefit of our full focus and our full concentration, do we? What's your hurry, honey? It's just one damn thing after another. Really. And we have to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Now, a lot of times we're doing it for a reason that makes sense to us, which is we don't ever really want to be here now. We don't want to put out the energy to be here now, and we always imagine that I will feel better later. See, this is the evil influence of time. And this is why timelessness is so often talked about in the spiritual path. It's not just, and that's what I talked about yesterday, about time. It had a different, I think maybe the word time was in the title, but in any case, I was talking about time because our proper relationship to time is also an important aspect of happiness. Because if we're not really giving ourselves into the moment, like, what are we saving ourselves for? That was the voice in my head. What do you think is going to happen? Then, when you're now just walking down to go to the store, or doing the laundry, or even sitting down to write a book, like, what's the difference? It's just one moment of the opportunity to concentrate and be an instrument through your willpower for the joy of God, or not. And the experiences, as long as we imagine that our inner experience is conditioned by our outer experience, we're constantly a slave. We're constantly a slave to looking for the next experience that's going to change me inwardly. And this is what people do for incarnations. The marketing strategy for Ananda, which of course we try to be intelligent and aware in how we let people know that we exist. So when you start studying any kind of marketing, you have to ask, who is our audience, what is our demographic? And it's been always exceedingly difficult to figure out what the demographic is for interest in the path of self-realization, because there's just no external pattern. You can't find it. I mean, there are a few. If a person is still struggling to survive, and they haven't yet mastered the capacity essentially to live and not always be afraid of starving or not really making it, it's hard to accept, to talk about a teaching that tells you that you won't find satisfaction in the world if you've never had anything of the world. So there has to be a certain amount of ego capacity to function, to become on the spiritual path. But what I really wanted to say is the demographic of Ananda is people who have come to understand that the outer world is a reflection of the inner world, and have come to understand that there is an inner reality that must be attended to, certainly with equal priority, if not higher priority, than the external world. And once that thought is there, then self-realization begins to make sense. Until that thought is there, self-realization just seems awful. And now the confusion, and this is where the question that I've had today is, if we say that we should be detached, if we should say that we should be even-minded, that we should accept everything with equal, I'm using the word enthusiasm, but if nothing in the world is really going to be happiness producing, the tendency is to become apathetic, or to become indifferent, or to become passive. Now the Bhagavad Gita talks a lot about this, and this was another question I was asked. Can we avoid karma simply by doing nothing? And the Gita deals with this at great length, and Swami's commentary, the classes I've given, the classes Swami's given, and Jyotish and Devi have given classes. Non-action is action, because everything in this universe is a flow of energy. And so when you try to resist that energy, that's a positive action. To float and to be in the energy and to cooperate with the energy and to swim with your own power is different than trying to do nothing. And of course, the difficulty with trying to do nothing is almost always it's because we're afraid to make a mistake and we're afraid to be hurt. And fear of mistakes and fear of being hurt are really fundamental, human realities that have to be dealt with. But that's the karma. The karma is, why am I afraid? I remember many years ago thinking, if a certain situation I was in didn't work out and everything ended up in such a way that I was going to be hurt. Let me put it this way. I had to make a decision in my life as to what I was going to trust. Because if I decide I'm going to trust other people, that's a little bit of a dicey proposition, because even if I love someone and respect them and have a huge regard for them, I'm not capable of perceiving what their karmic trajectory is. I don't know what else might happen to them. I don't know what kind of challenges and difficulties they might face. So they can be completely sincere and I can be completely sincere, but change happens. So if I base, and including death, including sudden death, unexpected death, which is the cycle that we may be looking at right now, all of these things can happen. So if I say, I'm safe because this person has said so and so, or I'm safe because I have this particular marketable skill and I'll always be able to use it. I'm safe because my IRA is, invested in such and so a way. I'm safe because I own this home outright. I have no more mortgage payments. I'm safe because I have 4 children and they'll all take care of me. I mean, whatever we say I'm safe, it's always possible that you're not. So when that thought really came into me very deeply and I was having to decide whether to commit myself or protect myself. You see, that's the question. We have to decide whether we're going to commit ourselves or protect ourselves. So the question is, what am I going to commit to? If I commit, even to other people, no matter how noble they are, if they're not self-realized masters themselves, there's always an element of doubt there, and there's always death, which will interrupt anything. So if I commit myself to anything that's mutable, anything that's changeable, I'm going to be scared. And there's going to be a very strong desire not to commit myself. Just like, why would I? I read a quote from C.S. Lewis. Whenever you love, you are lining yourself up to have your heart broken. Now, and C.S. Lewis wrote this beautiful book, I believe it was he, about the death of his wife. And he said, it's not merely that I have been deprived, he said, but I have been mutilated. That's how he put it. Beautiful story about grief, and I hope that I've got the right author there. But he also had to say, and this was his conclusion, if you commit yourself to love, you open yourself to grief. So what is the alternative? And this is the alternative that many people take. We never quite commit ourselves because we know that we're risking. Now, the problem with that is if you never quite commit yourself, you never quite open yourself to that power of joy, and you never quite develop your willpower, and you're always holding back on your enthusiasm because you're not giving everything that you have to it. But that fear is so real and so valid. So I remember I had to say, I'm not committing myself to anyone or anything. I'm committing myself to God. And what I trust is I trust God. And what I trust is that God will send me only what I need. And that if He sends it to me. He'll take me by the hand and walk me through it. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I know that thou art with me. Now, wow, that's big. But you see, that's why Swami was fearless. And I've mentioned his fearlessness in other of these broadcasts. But that's why Swamiji could be so 100% committed, whether it was to picking up his dry cleaning, whether it was to his relationship with his friends, whether it was to a song he was writing or a book he was writing. He didn't trust anything. He didn't even trust himself. Because what do we know about ourselves? I remember, watching sometimes the fickleness of my affections. Today I'm wildly enthusiastic about this person or that thing, and tomorrow I just couldn't care less. I can't even trust myself. But I can trust God. And the way we trust God is we train ourselves to trust God. We look in that direction. The very first one of these broadcasts, I believe I talked about Spy Dog. We solve every problem in the direction of God. We take every dilemma, every issue, and we try to pick it up from the highest string. I'm about to get married. Will this marriage end in divorce? Well, I don't think so, otherwise I wouldn't be entering into it. So I have to commit myself completely as if I were certain that happiness would be mine. And happiness will be mine if I use my willpower to be a channel for God's joy. And if I don't use my willpower and just sort of sit here holding on to myself, Swami commented about someone, so-and-so, he said, seems quite detached. He said, but he's not detached, he's just uncommitted. And so we have to look deep into our hearts and ask ourselves, what am I really doing? Now, it's not easy, for example, to commit yourself to another person, to commit to raising a child, for example, to commit yourself to really put yourself into a career or into an artistic effort where you're just going to persevere until you've given it everything you can, succeed or fail. Do we commit ourselves because we know we're going to succeed, or do we commit ourselves because that's who I am? Enthusiasm is my spiritual practice. Swamiji was just so wonderful as an example. There was always so much energy around him, and he was detached in the sense that he was realistic. If something wasn't meant to be, he didn't just beat his head against the wall and keep insisting that it had to be because after all, that's what he wanted. He was enthusiastic for God's will. I had a very interesting experience when, I keep touching my face and I'm not supposed to do that. When I had to put out the energy to try to incorporate Ananda Village as a California city. This was a whole marvelously fun adventure. I talk about it in Light Bearer. I also talk about it in Swami Cree Ananda as we have known him. So I'm not going to tell the whole story, but it was 18 months of an effort to make Ananda Village into a California city, which I know sounds a little counterintuitive, so to speak, but the only entity, we were always in a struggle with our neighbors to be able to develop the village the way we wanted to, because land use was determined by the county and public input had a huge influence on it. But a municipality has control over its own land use, and we actually investigated, and even though our small community did not look anything like a city, it's a legalistic definition. So it looked like we could do it. And it was exceedingly contentious in the county. At the end of 18 months, the last hearing was held in an 800-person auditorium, the largest in the county. 800 people were there. Everybody who wasn't part of Ananda opposed it. And they opposed it vehemently. And in the end, there were 8 members of the commission to decide, and 7 voted against us. I could say that it was not a proper vote. I could say a lot of things about that, which I did in the book, but it's not important here. But what happened was, after 18 months of effort, and then we were going to take it to the courts. We were going to sue because we felt it had been inappropriately carried out for reasons that we thought were valid. But then Swami felt guided by Master to say, we're not going to sue. It's appropriate. It's not good to mix secular and spiritual, which is really what the issue was. But what happened was I was fully into the project, and then boom, like that, it stopped. With no warning, with no transition zone, with no cool down period. Just, I was 100% for it. Master told Swami not to do it, so we weren't doing it anymore. I said to Swami, why didn't Master tell me? Swami said, did you ask? I said, no, sir. I just assumed. And then we sort of smiled at each other. I said, big mistake. He said, yeah, big mistake. Okay, here's the point of it, though. I'd given myself everything I had to this project, and in a split second, I had to turn like this. So I had to find out, what was I committed to? Now, I had total faith in Swamiji, and he also backed up his intuition with reason. So I became persuaded, and it wasn't hard to persuade me, that he was right. We had done everything we could. We didn't need to do any more, which was go to the courts. We didn't need to sue on the issue. We shouldn't sue on the issue. So I had to decide, what was I really committed to? Was I committed to making us a city? Or was I committed to doing what my guru wanted me to do? Yes, I'd gotten a little confused on the point, hadn't I? So I had to spend several days, and just for fun, I got a really high fever, which I almost never do. So I got sick, really sick, for about 3 days. And when I got up from the fever, I went to Swami and I said, it's fine. I don't mind losing. I don't mind that I just put myself out there with everything I had, totally defeated. I don't mind that. I said, but it still bothers me that the other people won. And I was committed to beating them. And I wasn't committed to what God wanted. Very good lesson. You know, what are we committed to? Mother Teresa of Calcutta was asked whether her nuns were really all that efficient in helping the poor. And Mother Teresa said, I'm not helping the poor. She said, I'm doing what Jesus asked me to do. I don't think most of the people to whom she said that actually understood the distinction, you see, but it's huge. And if you're committed to doing what God has asked you to do, and one of the ways you can tell what God has asked you to do, as Swami said, is, what do you have to do? What's in front of you? What's your task? What's your responsibility? What is your opportunity? What is your talent? What is your inclination? What is your desire? Who are you? You are the manifestation of God. And if we just stand there and think that God is pleased when we don't do our very best to be a channel for His consciousness, because we don't want to get involved, we don't want to get attached, we don't want to get hurt, we don't want to make a mistake. He can't do anything with us. You know, even energy that's going in the wrong direction, Swami said, I'd much rather have energy, lots of energy going in the wrong direction, than have someone who doesn't put out energy at all. Because if energy is flowing, then many things happen. And one of the most important thing is, it's the way Swami put this often to us, energy has its own intelligence, which is, if you're not sure what to do, just start. Because the putting out energy itself raises your vibration and puts you in tune with a higher consciousness. Energy, power, is one of the manifestations of the divine. And if we don't manifest the divine through us, then we never find out who and what either we or God are. If we just sit there and wait until everything is clear, nothing ever becomes clear. When I first came to Ananda, I had been deeply devoted to Ramakrishna. Then I met Swami Cree Ananda, and I knew that Swami Cree Ananda was the pole star, and I had to follow it. And he was devoted to Paramhansa Yogananda. And it wasn't that I was against Yogananda, I just didn't know. And so I came to Ananda. I moved there because Swami Cree Ananda was there. I was absolutely certain of that. But this business of Yogananda Ramakrishna, I just couldn't sort it out. But this is what I realized. I couldn't sort it out because it required an intuition I didn't have. And in order to get clarity about my intuition, I had to put out energy and have some experience that would give me a new perspective. So I said, literally, I said to Ramakrishna and to Yogananda, you guys sort this out. In the meantime, I know I'm supposed to be here. I know I'm supposed to apply myself to what Swami Cree Ananda is saying. I'm going to commit myself completely, and if there's something else I need to know, you tell me. And I really never thought about it again. And about a year later, I woke up one morning and realized, well, of course, Ramakrishna was what they call the Upaguru. He took care of me, delivered me to Master, and then everything was clear, and I've never thought about it since. But if I hadn't committed myself because I didn't know, my consciousness would never have changed, and therefore the intuition would never have come to me, you see? Doing nothing is something. Doing nothing is saying, I refuse to develop. And in order to grow, we have to risk. But if we risk, we find that God's on the other side of that. God bless you.